You are listening to Latinx America, a podcast focused on highlighting catalysts who are using, leveraging, or creating technology to help our community achieve more. With your host, Adriana Flores Ragade.
Thank you again for being with us today. In our last episode with Norma Fernandez from Everyone On, she highlighted the need for broadband access at home. And today, Hector shares some stats highlighting an increase in internet access by our Latinx community. Hector is a program manager at Google.org, where he manages philanthropic programs and investments in the Americas. He also helps lead Google.org's global crisis response and humanitarian efforts. He's also an advisor to HOLA, Google's Hispanic Employee Resources Group, and his previous experience includes strategic investment banking at Oppenheimer, constituent case work while working for Congresswoman Debbie Wasserman Schultz, and international affairs experience with the economic section of the U.S. Embassy in Tokyo. Hector holds a bachelor's degree in international business from Florida International University, a professional certificate on social entrepreneurship from Stanford Graduate School of Business, and a master's in public affairs from the University of California, Berkeley. Hector is originally from Fort Lauderdale, Florida, and now resides in San Jose, California.
Hi, Hector. How are you? Thank you so much for joining us today. Why don't we start by learning a little bit about your journey and learning about you?
Awesome. That would be wonderful. So I often describe my journey, and specifically my journey into technology, into the tech sector, using one word, and that's very unconventional. I grew up in a household where technology was common. My dad is a computer science engineer, and I always remember my dad having the latest and greatest technology for the time around him in a very early age, right? So from the brick cell phones to the clunky compact PCs with dial-up and then DSL. So it's definitely a very different time for sure. But I remember interacting with technology really, really early on. And I think this really shaped my perspective of the world. And it helped me understand the power of technology. And as a result, I think I was always comfortable with technology, but I never actually saw myself or had ambitions of working in tech or at Google. I always thought that I would go into public service and work for the government in some capacity. When I was in undergrad, I was interning for a member of Congress, and I thought that was going to be the pathway I was going to take. But then my junior year in undergrad at Florida International University, I was looking for internships around the country, and I wanted to get out of Florida just for that summer, and was very intrigued by a company that was breaking all the established norms and all the rules in corporate America. And I soon after applied to the Google Bold internship program, thinking it was a long shot, thinking that nothing was going to come out of it. And after a handful of interviews, I found myself living out the coldest summer of my life in San Francisco, interning at Google on the people operations team, and falling in love with Northern California, with Google, with the tech sector, and anxiously awaited the opportunities that lay ahead. And now I find myself here 7 years later, still in tech and still in Google.
Where are we, in your opinion, Hector, in terms of, as a community, in terms of digital and mobile use and our adoption of new devices? And I'm so glad to hear that you were exposed early, because not everyone is, and but your dad was an innovator at an early age for you. So where do you think we are as a community?
Definitely. I think our community is definitely far ahead and continues to move forward. While I absolutely acknowledge that my narrative was and is not the norm, it is very clear by looking at all the statistics that Latinos are becoming more frequently adopters of technology and new devices than other people groups. In fact, since 2009, we've seen that the share of Latino adults who report using the internet has increased by 20 percentage points, from 64% to 84% in 2015. And between that same 2009 to 2015 date range, the share of immigrant Hispanics who use the internet grew from 51% to 78%. And the share of Spanish dominant Hispanics who use the internet about doubled from about 36% to 74%. So we're really seeing that the digital divide among Hispanics has been diminishing. Access is becoming more prevalent. Adoption of technology is becoming more prevalent. Latinos trend relatively high in comparison to other groups. In fact, Latinos make up nearly 15% of the total US population that's using mobile or smartphones, and they're 28% more likely to own a mobile device than other minority people groups. And that's also true for services that companies like Google provide through platforms like YouTube. In fact, we have done a handful of studies and have found that 1 in 4 US Hispanics are using YouTube or viewing YouTube videos on mobile on a daily basis. And all this trajectory really points towards this estimated $1.5 trillion in buying power that Latinos will have. And it's certainly a group that marketers and companies are paying more and more attention to as a result.
Hector, I really like this asset-based view because you are really sharing what's going on in our community and good news for our community. Because if we're users, I'm hoping that we make the transition from users to becoming innovators and developers as well of tech. So do you have any examples, and I know you mentioned YouTube, of Latinx who have launched their dreams and have been successful through some of the platforms that Google has?
Absolutely, yeah. So I think there's plenty of examples of different Latinos and Latinas that have leaned into technology or leaned into Google platforms to launch initiatives, whether there be social movements, whether they be nonprofit groups, whether they be small businesses. I think one of the biggest challenges that our community faces within the framing of thriving in the online ecosystem is the little knowledge they have as to how many tools and how much information is available out there for free to help them thrive. And like I mentioned, I've seen many folks leverage our tools in creative ways. I was actually just in Puerto Rico a few weeks ago and got to meet with many entrepreneurs and small businesses that are working hard to recover after Hurricane Maria, and got to meet with this gentleman, this older man named Sheo, who is using the Google platforms like Google Maps and Places to make his business known. He owns a small panaderia in Humacao that was deeply impacted by the hurricane. And now he's on the road back to reconstruction, to building back better. And he is aiming to get his panaderia back on the map, back in public consciousness, so that he can get business again. And it was such a neat story to see him leaning into online platforms and online products to raise his profile. Another example is a shaker and mover like Sarai Espinosa Salamanca, who's also from the Bay Area, and founded the Dreamers Roadmap, which is a tool that helps dreamers find scholarships. And I remember when she was getting started in this journey, once again, also really leaning heavily into baseline Google tools like Gmail and spreadsheets and other tools to really help her navigate the entrepreneurial space and connect with other innovators that could help this tool be a success.
And Sarai was one of our guests, and she's doing a lot of wonderful things. But I think having the tools and I think increasing the awareness, it has to be like a big priority. And I'm hoping that our community learns that there are free resources. I'm using Gmail because I was able to put the brand of my podcast and easily create an account. The other thing is that you guys have just launched Google Podcasts, so I'm learning everything that I need to know about Google Podcasts. So you guys continue to innovate, and you have been in the industry for some time now and have played a leading role in Google's Hispanic outreach efforts. What prompted you to do this? And can you share some of the efforts that Google has implemented or has underway that have directly benefited our Latinx communities in the US and abroad?
Absolutely. So, I truly believe that we are the byproduct of the people around us who shape us and the people that went ahead of us that shaped the path that we now get to walk on. And when I first got into Google, there was a clear gap. There was an existing Latino employee resource group, a Latino community, but there was still some much untapped potential. And that's when a dear friend of mine and colleague of mine, Eliana Murillo, approached me very early on in my career. I must have been working at Google for no more than a year when she came up with this crazy idea. Let's revolutionize the Latino experience at Google. Let's create a space for the Latino familia to thrive. And let's leverage this tool to help propel the company in a direction that's more in tune with the Latino community. And this idea quickly cannonballed. Eliana and another one of our colleagues, Adriana Samaniego, and myself, and a few others found ourselves working closely and founding Hola, which is our new Hispanic employer resource group. And through Hola, I have gotten to meet many of our Latino Googlers over the years, all whom continue to amaze me with their stories and their talents and their passions to make this company and the world a better place. And the beautiful thing about Hola is that it has become so vital to Google because it brings in people who might otherwise feel like cultural strangers and tells them, come as you are, you belong. And in that sense of belonging, we've really been able to create this beautiful internal familia. Now, in terms of efforts that are underway, Hola has really grown and has begun to help shape and influence many aspects of Google. Through my role at google.org, I've had the opportunity to work closely with them and many other great entities inside of Google and externally to Google that are directly shaping and helping Latinos. A few examples that I can share with you is the work that we're doing with the Latino Community Foundation based out of the Bay Area. I've had the privilege of working with LCF for over 5 years, from what started as a grassroots effort to expose Latino families in the Bay Area to Google and to technology, and has now turned into a formal partnership with a $1 million grant from google.org to help create what we're calling the Latino Nonprofit Accelerator, which is a program that helps Latino nonprofits reach their full potential and get to a point where big entities like google.org and other corporate players can invest serious money into them to help them reach their constituencies. Another example is the campaign that I recently got to work on and launch, which was a campaign to bring economic recovery aid to Puerto Rico. That was a campaign that we launched about 20 days ago, actually, at g.co/support PR. And the work that we got to do there was also largely done in partnership with Hola. And as a result of the conditions that Hola has created within the company to be more in tune with Latino needs.
It seems like you're leading the way, that Ola is helping lead the way and impacting issues that our community cares about and directly impact our community, as in the case with the Latino Community Foundation work. You went from, 5 years ago from developing a relationship to now having Google invest in such a wonderful organization. So thank you for doing that. And in the same vein, you have a long history of giving and volunteering. For the Latinx that are listening to this podcast, what advice do you have in terms of scaling their impact?
That's a great question. I think the way that I think about it is there's so much happening in so many areas of need. It is just really important for you to narrow down. So the advice that I tend to give people is pick a cause. There's many vital topics out there, from civil rights to racial justice to environmental stewardship to social welfare. And I think it's important for each individual to narrow down their scope and select a cause or two, or maybe even three, that they're really passionate about and just go deep with it. And diving deep can take many forms. It can be financial giving, it can be advocacy, it can be giving of your time through volunteering, by serving on a board. In my personal case, the three areas that I've really tried to focus my personal energy behind are social justice, human rights, and environmental justice. And within the framing of those, I also try to hit in some of these different diving deep components, right? So with the social justice work, I'm part of the Latino Giving Circle with the Latino Community Foundation, and we work closely with immigrant rights organizations through my personal giving and through the Giving Circle's giving to help augment their support in terms of social justice. When we're looking at topics like human rights and democracy, I think there's definitely a role there that I engage with nonprofits that are leading in advocacy and finding ways to create and elevate the narrative to create more awareness. And when it comes to things like environmental justice, I also have the privilege of serving on the board of advisors of a great nonprofit called Oceanic, which is trying to raise the profile and create more awareness behind some of the biggest issues impacting our oceans today. So there's many different ways for people to plug in and add some of their support, but it's really important for you to try to narrow it down and pick a few causes that you really want to deep dive with.
Thank you, Hector. Let's go back to earlier. You share some important statistics that really give me hope in terms of where we are as a community when it comes to consumption and participation. But in your opinion, what will it take for us to change the narrative for the Latinx community when it comes to full participation in tech or adoption or even creation that can change our lives?
It's clear by some of the stats that I showed earlier that Latinos are adopters of technology and are engaged in tech usage.
Mhm.
And I don't think that is the narrative that needs to be changed. I think the narrative that's need to be changed is that Latinos are not just consumers of technology, but they're also producers of technology. And tech companies like Google have been working hard to ensure that the makeup of our company reflects the makeup of the country. And the makeup of the country is multicolored. It is multiracial. It is diverse. And that is why it is so important to have Latinos in technical roles, more Latinos studying in technical fields with STEM, science, technology, engineering, and math, as these Latinos will be the producers of technology of tomorrow that will be able to then lean into that and change people's lives through technology.
So becoming producers and innovators, in addition to obviously consuming and adopting new technology, is very important. In your personal day-to-day life, how do you use technology?
Nearly in every aspect of my life, I am using technology. And for example, I don't, and I don't think that's indicative just to me because I work in technology, but also if I look at my extended family or my immediate family that are not in the tech sector, I also see their over-indexing use of technology. In fact, I don't know of a single Latino that doesn't belong to at least 10 different family WhatsApp groups. With the cousins and then the aunts and the uncles. And so that's a very clear case of use of technology, or Latinos that don't constantly come through YouTube for content from their favorite artists or content creators, or through Instagram to find the latest memes, or to envy their friends' pictures, right? So there's a lot of that social component that I think is very, very real in my life. And I think also some components around learning. I frequently use the web and technology as a platform for learning and expanding and stretching myself, whether it be about a new topic that I'm interested about or a new hobby or skill that I'm trying to acquire. And then, of course, at working at a tech company, pretty much every aspect of my job requires technology, whether it be email or video conferencing or phone calls. Every aspect of my job is really integrated into tech.
You mentioned learning. Do you have any platforms that you use that you might want to recommend in terms of someone wanting to do a deeper dive into a specific topic?
I think there's so many virtual platforms right now that are so useful, right? So I think if you go into tools like YouTube, you can pretty much learn any single topic by digesting content and video content from YouTube, whether it be coding or picking up a new skill set or a new hobby. If you can think of it, there's probably someone out there teaching it through videos and content on YouTube. There's also all these MOOCs, these massive online learning courses that people can sign up for. Oftentimes they are free of charge, and you can also sign up for them and lean into some more academic related topics. But relatively, the web really has just a plethora of options for us to expand our thinking and learn.
I have to share with you a personal story. My daughter wanted a rainbow cake for her 9th birthday.
Mm-hmm.
And I had no idea how to make a rainbow cake. So I went to YouTube and I got a tutorial and I watched it a few times and had my iPad right next to on the counter in the kitchen. So I was watching and going step by step, and she thought it was like the most beautiful cake in the world when it was done. Obviously, it did not turn out as nice as the one in the YouTube video, but like you said, I mean, there are different tools that we can use, and that's how I was able to leverage one of your platforms to make my daughter very happy on her 9th birthday a couple of weeks ago.
That's absolutely amazing. That is, and I think by extension, I have also leaned into that platform many times. I am probably not the best cook in the world, but I do tend to go into YouTube rather often just to learn how to make quick things that I want to impress people with. So maybe a rainbow cake will be next in my menu for my friends.
Yeah, that, especially if your friends are 9-year-olds. No, I'm just joking. Over the past few years, Google has obviously made a conscious effort to be inclusive of our communities by highlighting some of the costumes or highlighting some of the people on their banners. Like I remember the Selena and Cantinflas and a lot of the banners that you have for Dia de los Muertos. Has Ola been influential in kind of shaping some of that direction?
So we call those banners that you see on the homepage, we call those doodles, Google Doodles. And I have personally taken on the task of drawing each one of those doodles. Oh. I'm just kidding. But many of these things, back to your point, many of these doodles and initiatives that Google does put out for the community are a natural progression and result of our presence in the company. The Latinos within Google today serve as evangelists, as advocates, and as champions for the interest and providing a voice for the community overall internally. And it is great to see that advocacy or that proximity pays off with public recognition of the community through these tools. And in reality, I also think that while we Latinos at Google would like to take all the credit, I also think this is largely in response to the future of America. And that future is colorful and it reaches the full spectrum of people and races and cultures. And Google is embracing those accordingly. And that's reflected through these things like the doodles.
Great. And it's a great future, I have to tell you. What advice do you have for Latinos who want to help their companies become more culturally competent? Just given that, you were there for the inception of Ola and you've seen, the company itself take certain steps to become more culturally aware and culturally sensitive.
Yeah. So I think on that note, I would definitely say advocacy, advocacy, advocacy. It is not an easy path, and you will encounter plenty of resistance. But if you continue to stand firm and raise your voice for the voiceless, you will triumph. And advocacy doesn't just mean protests and angry letters and petitions, even though it's looking more and more like that today, given our current state of affairs. But it really just means proximity. It means creating allies across various people groups. It means bringing Latino culture to the office, bringing your full self to work. And that might make people a little bit uncomfortable at first, but with time, that proximity, they will learn to embrace it.
So advocacy plays a big role. Now, for someone that is, maybe at a startup or a smaller company, or maybe even in a different industry and wants to join one of the tech giants like Google, what advice would you give to them?
So tech giants are hungry for diverse talent, and they're looking for you. Many times that means folks with technical backgrounds from colleges and four-year universities, but also people with vocational training and IT certifications. There are many paths to get into tech giants. And the great part about tech giants is that all the jobs are not tech related, which is good for me, right? I don't have a technical background. I studied international business for my undergrad and public affairs for my master's. And the beautiful thing about these big companies is that you don't have to necessarily be a coder or an engineer. There are jobs in all sorts of places at Google, from human resources to legal to finance, and virtually any function that is needed to make a company run. You'll find roles like that in places like Google and other tech giants. So if you have a passion for business or technology, there is room for you in the tech sector.
And they have to be proactive about finding those roles, and then maybe even leveraging some of the learning opportunities that you mentioned earlier to make sure that they're also in line with what those roles require too. Hector.
The
Mhm,
one thing the other thing that I would add on that is
mhm.
also the importance of taking a risk and putting yourself out there, right? Similar to my story, when I applied to the Google internship program for the first time, I quite honestly did not think that I would get an interview, that I would get a call back, or that I would find myself working at that company that I was aiming to intern for many years down the line. So just be willing to take a risk, go outside of your comfort zone, and you'll be surprised what you can accomplish.
Thanks, Hector. You are very accomplished, and you've accomplished so much, and you're very humble about it, I have to say. Can you share who's part of Team Hector and how they have supported you along the way?
Absolutely. I'd be happy to. So I think everyone needs a small army to succeed in life, an army of role models and mentors and cheerleaders to be able to succeed in this world. And starting off with role models, it was a privilege to grow up in a household with role models like my dad that clearly displayed to me that I too could work in a tech giant or anywhere else for that matter, and a mom that was nurturing and passionate and selfless. I know that it's not the reality for many Latino households, which is why I think opportunities such as this one, where Latinos in tech, such as myself, get to share our stories with the community, they're really important because I really believe that you need to see it to be it. And I hope this podcast can help encourage Latinos to pursue careers in places they haven't seen themselves in before, whether that be big tech companies or philanthropy. Moving on from role models to mentors, I'm also a huge believer in building up your network of mentors, almost like a board of advisors, if you will. These are people that have lived a little bit more life than you have, that have learned lessons the hard way, and can now help orient you and help you avoid pitfalls and push you in a better path to success. And I have many folks like these in my life, from Antonio Tijerino over at the Hispanic Heritage Foundation to Aida Alvarez at the Latino Community Foundation to Gina Rudan from Google X to Wendy Grant from Republica, Betty Ann Gallagher from Congresswoman Westerman Schultz's office, and the list just goes on and on and on. These are people that have really instilled a lot of professional and life wisdom into me. And then the last group, but yet somehow the most important group of them all, is your cheerleaders, who almost play a role of a sort of board of directors for your life. These are your go-to people, the ones that you choose to be vulnerable around, and the ones that see your insecurities and self-doubts. They see you questioning your abilities and your accomplishments. And right when that imposter syndrome kicks in, they're also the people that crush that symptom and remind you of your true north and keep cheering you on, encouraging you, and challenging you and holding you accountable. And I am just so blessed to have such a great group of beloved people that play this role for me in my life, from my amazing girlfriend, Tara, who is consistent rock in my life and keeps me grounded and encouraged, to one of my best friends, Jeffrey, who consistently challenges me and inspires me to be better and do better through his words and actions, to friends like my buddy Luis and my friend Eliana, who I mentioned earlier, who push me to think boldly and challenge the status quo consistently. These people and many, many, many others are part of my tribe. And you really need to establish your tribe early on. These are people that will keep you sane, that will keep you motivated. And when everything seems to be falling apart and you find yourself doubting everything, they'll remind you what your journey is all about.
I really like the way you describe the tribe, and it sounds like you have amazing people in your life. And thank you so much for being one of the champions for what I'm doing, because you were one of the first people that said that's great. I'd be glad to help in any way. And I think having you as a guest is like a realization of something that I have been thinking about doing for a long time, and your support meant the world to me. So thank you so much for encouraging me as well. You're a champion and sponsor to Latinx and non-Latinx individuals and causes alike. Can you share how others can become those champions, or be part of someone's tribe?
Absolutely. So, in my experience, being a champion comes from that term that I used earlier, which is proximity. Proximity breaks down bias, it breaks down apprehension. And to achieve proximity successfully, it requires a lot of intentionality and willingness to be vulnerable, and willingness to have uncomfortable conversations with people. You have to be willing to bring them into your journey, and you have to be open to joining their journey as well. I think one of the people that I see doing this particularly well is one of my colleagues and dear friends, Brendan, who is a Chinese American and has truly done a beautiful job at becoming a champion. He has embarked on a journey of allyship with the Latino community at Google and has become one of our leads within Ola. And I have learned so much from him each and every day about what it means to be an ally and a champion for a community that you adopt. That is truly inspiring to see how you as an ally can really become such a loud voice for those communities that you participate in.
Thanks, Hector. Who has had the most influence on you in your life, whether it's personally or professionally, and why?
So I think I've mentioned my dad a handful of times, but my dad has seriously influenced my life in a really powerful way. His hustle and grit and passion and optimism have taught me much about life in the world. He is a first generation immigrant. And as a first generation immigrant, he taught me about risk taking and tenacity. As a man of faith, he's taught me about unapologetically staying true to your convictions. As a family man, he's been a caretaker and a steward of not only his nuclear family, but like a good Latino, his extended family as well. And he's always balanced family life with the needs of the community, whether it meant taking in immigrant families into our home while they got on their feet, or working with the homeless community to help them rehabilitate, volunteering to feed the needy at nearby shelters. My dad truly never turned down a chance to show grace to people on the margins. And these experiences have really shaped my worldview and have given me a sense of social justice and altruism, which continue to influence the work that I get to do today at google.org.
What do you do at google.org? I know you mentioned earlier crisis intervention, but can you share a bit about some of the work that you're doing? And it sounds like your dad is an amazing person, but he practiced what he preached also. So not only was he um, shaping your path in some way, but he was also following what he said he should be doing.
Yes, he did. And I think I see that reflected in a lot of the work that I get to do within google.org. So, google.org is the philanthropic arm of Google. And the way that we organize ourselves is by geography. So, I sit within the Americas team, and I have the great privilege of looking after a lot of our grant making and social impact programs in Canada, in Latin America, and in the US within the framing of US Hispanics. So that means establishing relationships and doing grants and social impact work with nonprofits, with social shakers and movers, and with entrepreneurs that are truly providing more services and unleashing the full capacity of our communities in these regions.
And Google has a great reach and they're doing wonderful things. And I'm glad that you are leading the way there as well. In terms of as you move forward, what is the next play for Hector? What's in the future for you?
Well, I've been at Google now for longer than I ever thought I would be.
It's a long time for
A
a tech
long
company.
time. They always talk about tech years as dog years. So I've pretty much spent my entire career at Google so far, given that I've been here nearly 7 years. But, this place is truly wonderful and magical and hard to leave. But I recently had the opportunity to wrap up my master's in public affairs over at the Goldman School of Public Policy at Berkeley. And I think that I have a career pivot in the near horizon. I've always considered two paths for myself after Google, one being an entrepreneurial path and the other being a public service path, or potentially both in some sort of sequence. And I think it's still a little early to tell which of the two paths I'm going to be heading in next. But one thing's for sure, and that is that as a Venezuelan American that has benefited from ample opportunity, I am compelled to give back to my community. And that's why I'm so thankful for the opportunity that I have at google.org to invest in a better, more just, and more equitable world for everyone. And I'm certainly looking forward to doing more of that in whatever job I choose to do next.
Thank you, Hector. I'm very grateful once again for having you and for having you share your story, your passion, and advice with our community. And I look forward to continuing to follow your path.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate you having me on here. And I really hope that this will serve as encouragement to let people, to be reminded that we all at various times feel like we're faking it. And nobody really has it figured out. And those that seem like they have it figured out, the only thing that they figure out is how to be a master of illusion. So don't let uncertainty discourage you, and keep trying new and different things. And eventually, you will succeed and accomplish great things. So I really hope that the Latinos and everyone listening to this will take that to heart.
Mil gracias, Hector. Hasta pronto.
Gracias.
This was a very fun and informative interview. Here are some key takeaways based on the conversation with Hector. The good news is that Latinos are becoming more frequent adopters of technology of new devices. So we now need to transition from becoming consumers into becoming creators, whether we focus on content creation in platforms like YouTube or becoming creators or developers of our own platforms. Also, as Hector mentioned, before paying for tools, learn about free options that you can leverage. I looked into this for you and found free options ranging from baseline tools like Gmail, Google Translate, Google Allo, Google Maps, Google Assistant, video conferencing, and YouTube for consumers, just to name a few, to key tools for developers, which you can access at developer.google.com/products. When it comes to giving back, Hector encouraged us to be involved in a cause that we are passionate about and consider narrowing our choices and having a deeper commitment to that selected organization. We highlighted the importance of taking a risk, and he also mentioned how important it was for you to put yourself out there. So apply for that job or submit your application for an internship because you might be pleasantly surprised with the response that you get. Finally, after you finish listening to this episode, I encourage you to write down who you think should be in your tribe and reach out to them this week. You can follow Hector's model and begin to create your board of advisors made up of mentors, as well as your personal board of advisors made up of people close to you who can be honest with you, will be sensitive to your vulnerabilities, and lift you up when you start doubting yourself, and really remind you of your vision and your strengths. We are blessed to have people like Hector sharing their valuable time and expertise, and if you want to be part of the show, please send me a note. Once again, if you like this podcast, subscribe, share with a friend, and don't forget to review and provide feedback after you listen.
Thanks for joining us today. Don't forget to follow us on Facebook at Latinx America and on Twitter at America Latinx, or email any questions or ideas to latinxamerica@gmail.com. Gracias y hasta la próxima semana.